Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Guns and gun control and guns and shooting in schools are top of the mind and top of the news, given what's happened in the United States in the last short while. And so I thought I'd check in with Alex Vezina. He is the CEO of Prepared Canada. He's an emergency preparedness expert. He teaches in the what's it called? The Emergency and Disaster School at course at York University.
A disaster and emergency management program at York, yeah.
Disaster and Emergency Management Program. And he's written 3 articles in that have gotten published recently in the Toronto Sun on this topic. And one of them was on the simplistic slogans that people use in regards to guns and gun control. Alex Vezina, welcome to the show. And tell me, if you could, what your comments are in regards to simplicity or oversimplistic slogans in gun control.
Yeah, so happy to see you again, Brian. The main point of that piece in particular was I saw a lot of arguments, and I think we've all seen these arguments from all sides of the debate, and there's actually more than 2 sides of the gun control debate or gun safety debate or control measures for firearms in general or weapons in general debate. What I've seen over and over, and I think once again a lot of us have seen over and over, is the oversimplified arguments. You have probably heard "guns don't kill people, people kill people" before.
Yep, for sure.
Which is slightly intellectually disingenuous. It is, when taken literally, kind of true. The same way that you need anyone in most cases to be holding the weapon to use the weapon. But if you take that example and you stretch it and you try to apply it to something like anthrax, if you tried to say, anthrax doesn't kill people, people kill people, or tanks don't kill people, people kill people, or whatever it is, you start excusing any culpability to the tool when it comes to any death at all. It has really interesting implications for health and safety, for example, too. Like when you look at health and safety, what people will often do, especially the insurance company will do, is they'll assume there's no such thing as an accident, which is, my belief, generally true. If someone dies or someone's injured in a workplace injury, for example, it's usually not the fault of the person. It's the fault of lack of training or faulty equipment or something to the effect. It's not the equipment's fault. It's some person has committed some negligence along the way to allow it to happen. But to completely absolve the tool entirely from it with a simplistic slogan like that completely oversimplifies the issue. So that's one thing on that part. The other thing on guns don't kill people, people kill people is you almost forget the importance of a force multiplier. And it's not just about whether or not people are killing people, but it's the ease in which they can do it. It's the cost benefit assessment that a prospective murderer does when they try to find their particular tool of the trade. A gun tends to be fairly cheap. It tends to be fairly easy to use, and you tend to get a lot of force multiplication without a lot of effort, relatively speaking, compared to trying to I'm not going to give out the exact methods here because it's not a good idea to do that in the news format, but compared to other methods you could do that require a lot more skill, even though they may kill more people, right? It's easy to use a gun. They're fairly cheap, and you get a lot of force multiplication for it. And I think that I
guess you also used the example of something that was a very personal. You were right there, and you had to use a lot of force, and it took a long time to murder someone, and that might not work as easy for the murderer.
I'll mention that one. I didn't want to give people ideas about ways to cause more harm, but like strangulation would be the other example that I used. Strangulation takes way more time, way more effort. Same thing with knives, way more time, way more effort. It's not as easy as pulling a trigger. And there is something to be said for giving civilians ready, easy access to force multiplication. Now, this isn't to say that guns are good or bad. It's just to say that making the guns don't kill people, people kill people argument with no other foundation and just throwing that out there and saying, okay, that's my argument. It's too simple. It's a more complex issue. And there's arguments on the other side too. There's a whole bunch of these on both sides of this.
Tell me the other side.
That was actually the first one I wrote way back there. I have to remember the main argument that I used in that piece. I think it was the if we save one life, it's always worth it example. So the other arguments are often given, and you'll hear this argument very frequently, and I think we heard it from elected officials in Canada or prospective elected officials in Canada in the federal and the provincial level in the last few months. After a tragedy someone is killed where a gun is part of the effect, they'll say, if whatever control measures put in, as if we save one life, it's worth it. That argument doesn't really hold up, because when you once again stretch that to its logical extreme, you have to ban all contact sports. You have to eliminate fishing. Like you have to, if
swimming pools.
So if we were to simply put in any control measure conceivable that could stop one person from dying, it would be intolerable. Like, we would never do it. So it's an intellectually disingenuous argument. And the real argument that we should be making on either side here, but the debate is, how many people are we saving really? Which is it's not actually a hard number to figure out, but it's a hard number to figure out if you don't know how to break down statistics and you don't have the database in front of you. But it's really find out what the number is of the expected range of people we will save, and then find out what we're sacrificing, and then have a serious conversation about what we're losing for what we're gaining, and look at the actual numbers.
So you're saying, right, really on both sides of things, the simplistic slogans aren't working. The guns don't kill people, people don't kill people is wrong, in that it is a lot easier, faster, more efficient, and the multiplier, you call it, works far larger on guns than on strangulation or other things. And so therefore the guns do play a role and need to be taken into account. But on the other side, people that say, let's just ban everything, that's also a simplistic slogan, because we don't ban driving, we don't ban swimming pools, we don't ban a lot of other things that also cause death. Correct?
Yeah, and keep in mind, I'm trying to give people terms here that are used frequently in the industry. So things like force multiplier are mentioned frequently in the military. They're mentioned frequently in policing when they talk about lethal and less lethal, because they don't say non-lethal things. Like, for example, a taser is not a non-lethal tool; it's a less lethal tool because it can kill people. Everything has a potential for force multiplication, and police and the military are careful about which force multipliers they apply and where. It's common jargon that's used there. So if you were to Google force multiplier and look into this, then you would it helps you, the keyword helps you refine what you're looking for. And then same thing, when you're looking at the arguments on the other side of this, you want to don't just look at homicides or suicides. You're looking at homicides or suicides where it was a gun that did it, and also where if it were not for the gun, it would not have happened, which is a very specific number, right? Like, there are many cases, especially, and this is unfortunate, but especially on the suicide data side, where a significant, and I have to find the studies again because you'll probably want to see them later, but there is a significant percentage of people who, had they not had the firearm, would have attempted suicide and likely been successful regardless. So if they would have done it anyways, then it's not a number that would have changed if you banned firearms. So you're trying to find the specific number of people that you would actually save, and then figure out what you lose, as far as what people enjoy on the other side, or what you gain, right? Because there's the public perception or sense of safety, which is an upside. If people feel safer because we banned something, that's actually an upside. So you want to have a serious conversation about actually what's happening, and it's boring and it's not fun and it's highly emotional for a lot of people, but it's not an exciting I gotcha moment in a clip with someone in front of a podium. It's a bunch of statisticians sitting around and trying to crunch the numbers. But that's what we. And
so let's take a break and think about what the crunching of the numbers are, and come back and talk a little bit about the reaction to the article and what you think the crunching of the numbers tells us. Stay with us, everybody. We're going to be back in 2 minutes with Alex Vezina talking about gun control. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting tonight with Alex Vezina. He is the CEO of Prepared Canada. It's an emergency preparedness company, and he's written 3 articles recently and published in the Toronto Sun in regards to gun control. And the first one was about simplistic slogans and how they're not helpful, and we got to be thinking them through and get the real statistics. And then your second one was kind of interesting, Alex, because it was about a lot of the reaction that you received, and it was titled "The Gun Control Debate Rages On." Tell me a little bit about the reaction you got, because what you said is that you got a huge amount of comment, and the sampling of the observations, we're asking any police officer in Canada, they will say banning handguns will do nothing. What did you respond to that? How did you respond?
So yeah, every now and then I'll get an article where I get floods of emails and a lot of people with significant reaction. And when I get ones where they're fairly involved and where they have quite a few questions, especially when they're the similar questions or similar comments, I'll put out another article to respond to it, because it's I feel like people just want answers. And sometimes I frankly run into the 600 to 700 word limit that you run into an article like this, and you just have to leave stuff out, so you kind of make a second one, right? As far as the reaction was concerned, I got a good mix. I got the pretty standard thing that you normally get when you publish anything, where you get certain people who didn't read the headline, and then tell you that you're all sorts of things that they don't like, which is pretty standard. But in addition to that, I commonly got a few arguments in particular, which were a bit interesting. The first was, I had people saying that essentially every police officer in the country are of the opinion that banning guns does nothing.
You had this Vancouver police officer, Chief Adam Palmer, who was quoted in 2019 saying, in every single case, there are already offenses for that. They're already breaking the law, and the criminal law in Canada addresses all of those circumstances. The firearms laws in Canada are actually very good right now. They're very strict.
Right. And that's the position that the police as an organization generally have been taking. And statistically, that is supported by what happens in Canada. The reality is that Canadian gun crime is more relative to the gun control measures that are done in the United States than the ones done in Canada, simply just because of how gun supply works in the country. And that's the position that police organizations tend to take. But more specifically, what the people have often said, and I got this very, very frequently, was you ask any police officer, and they painted all police officers with the same brush. And I took some issue with that, because there are a lot of police in this country. And in any organization with a large number of people, you're going to have divergent viewpoints. And I know some police personally that don't agree for whatever reason. And I take some issue in general with the because you're all a part of this organization or this demographic, age or gender or race or whatever, you must all believe the same thing, right? It doesn't sit right, especially with that number of people. So I wanted to point out the issues of the way statements are phrased and being careful about what is said. That's the first thing. The second thing was the other part of that is they can make the argument that there would be no effect, which is not what the police are saying. The police don't say there is no effect. They say that there would be a negligible effect. So they're not saying that no lives would be saved. They're saying that it's not necessary, and it wouldn't be worth the cost to implement a new system, essentially, which is it's different. And I know that you understand the difference, and I know a lot of the listeners will understand the difference, but not everyone will understand the difference between no change and a negligible change. So
there'll be a negligible change, so it's not worth all the money and effort, is what you're saying.
Right, as opposed to no change, because saying it's no change is effectively saying it's spitting in the face of aggrieved families. Like there's a distinct difference there fundamentally, and they would never make that claim. Like no professional organization would ever make the claim that what you're asking for would do absolutely nothing unless it was completely scientifically supported, which it's not. They can't make that claim. We're dealing with probabilities and statistics here, so they wouldn't be that.
They would argue that a lot of guns are smuggled across the border.
No, they will, which is why it's negligible. But they wouldn't say nothing. That's the difference. Like they wouldn't say that it would do nothing. They would say that it would do very little.
It's the legal people and the people that are safe gun owners that you're going to be impacting. The illegal owners and the gangs are still going to be able to get them.
Right. And that is basically their argument, because most of the crime in Canada is from guns that were legally obtained in America and that were illegally obtained in Canada, essentially. But the police are not going to say that if we banned all the guns in the country, we would not save one person from one legal gun not being misfired, which is what they would be claiming.
Okay, and then also
there was no change, right? Like that's the point.
I understand. And then you also go on though, and you point out that the United States, with its far more lax guns control, if not any gun control, has significantly greater homicides. than Canada.
Oh, there's no question. And
on a
then
per capita basis.
And it's not that they have no gun control, it's state dependent, right? Certain states have less than others, and certain states you have, as have been popularized by certain videos online recently, but most of us who are aware of this subject know already, 13-year-olds going to private gun shows and buying guns when they can't get a lottery ticket, right? Like you have stuff like that happening all the time in the States, and then being able to, transport them and sell them privately again. And it's very different there than here. There's no question, but it is state dependent, to be fair. Not every state is the same. And New York just recently, for example, just changed its gun laws and said to the rest of the country, we're not waiting, we're doing what we're doing it, right? So all the states isn't the same, to be fair to the states, but yes, they have way higher gun deaths. I believe the statistic I used to show was, I looked at the total number of gun deaths and the total population, and I represented both side by side so that people could look at the whole number or per capita as they want. Because I find if you do just per capita, it kind of paints a color over the statistic and can be misleading. So I tried to give all of the numbers in there so that people can draw their own conclusions. The way you represent numbers in media is important. You can this is another thing that is really important for gun statistics and statistics in general. People should understand, if the homicide rate in a small town, and we're talking a town of like less than 100 people, quadruples in 1 year, you might say that's horrifying. But if it went from 1 person to 4 people, you might think it's less horrifying.
So the statistic that you quoted was that in Canada in 2019, there were 552 homicides with a population of 38 million. The US, with a 10 times larger population of 329 million, had 17,709 homicides. So, if it was 10 times, they should have had like 5,000.
Well, no, it's next sentence there. That means the US had 8 to 9 times the population of Canada, but 32 times more homicides.
Right. Or,
right?
The way I like to think about it is that they had if they had Canada's number, they would have had 5,000 homicides, and they had 17,000. So
exactly. Well, the other thing is, if you want to find the ratio there, then you can just, like divide 8 or 9 into 32, and then you get your ratio.
Exactly.
But the point is, it's all there, so you can look at it and think about it any way you want. And I'm not trying to represent it in a way that's misleading, so that people can have it. Because if I said per capita or something, it might kind of be lost in the numbers. But the point is, even though they have a much bigger population, they have a much bigger death rate. And if you have more than double, in this case more than triple, the homicide rate, that's substantial. Like more than triple the homicide rate per capita is substantial, right?
No question.
Like many people will say that, and this is kind of one of the tricks with representing statistics. Many people will say, well, the number 3 is small, it's not that big. No, like when you're talking a tripling, after you account for a vastly different population, it can be huge. For example, India had substantially less COVID deaths than Canada per capita, but they had the mass graves burning.
So what?
But think about it. India had less deaths than us per capita, but they had mass burnings of bodies, and people were transporting their loved ones in the back of taxis, and they had to bring them back and forth to the site to burn them because they had to wait in line to burn their loved one.
So what are you saying? It just wasn't reported?
No, the point is that they had a lower death number because it was expressed in per capita, but the situation was worse socially, right? Like we did in Canada, we didn't have mass burnings of people in mass graves.
Okay, I understand.
Right?
I also think that frankly, the number was dramatically underreported, and The Economist has done a story on exactly that. They did an assessment of unexplained deaths around the world, and there were some countries, in Brazil and China and India were some of them, China not India and Brazil, where the unexplained deaths were far higher than the reported deaths from COVID. And so
but the problem is, though, when you do per capita, you're dividing Canada by 38 million, and you're dividing India by over 1 billion. So the point is, when you represent a statistic in per capita, it can be misleading.
I understand, but I
That's the
also think that the per capita death rate in India, according to the Economist magazine, was higher than Canada's, even though it may not have been reported in that because of the unexplained deaths. That there were just a lot of people that died and they didn't have the testing and they didn't go to hospitals, and so they weren't proven that they had died of COVID.
Either way, we can disagree with the source. The major point is representing data in per capita. That's the major point. And and hypothetically, let's say it was 3 times Canada's per capita death rate. That would be better represented to people in a total number than per capita, because people wouldn't necessarily instinctively understand that this number is being divided by 38 million, 37 million, and this number is being divided by over 1 billion.
Okay, I understand.
Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I actually disagree with you. I think per capita is the right way to think about it, because if one said that you had 1 million deaths in the United States and 1 million deaths in Canada, clearly that's in absolute terms, the same number. But in Canada, that would be a lot worse, because it would be, 1/30 of our population rather than 1/300 of the U.S. population. So putting in per capita terms ends up being very instructive as to what the problem is.
There's a difference here. So if you put it in per capita terms, but you just put the per capita number and you don't explain the difference in population, people don't necessarily get the context. And not everyone understands that all these countries have such different populations.
Okay, I think most people do, but okay.
Well, evidence I would say would disagree, but fair enough. I know many people in geography departments and universities that don't know the populations of the countries they're studying.
Okay, fine.
So you know what?
But based on your statistic that is now not necessarily in per capita, but in absolute terms from the United States, what that would suggest is that Canada is doing pretty good, and so therefore, our gun control that we have has reduced our mortality from guns by 32 times versus the United States, and so we're doing pretty good. So we don't need much more of that.
It's 32. Okay, well, no, it's not 32 times after you adjust for population, but yeah, it's by 3 point something times relative after population. But yeah, and that's why in one of the lines after that I say credit should be given where it's due. The reality is that there are other factors like our police, for example, that are definitely contributing to this in a positive way. I don't know if I would agree that our gun control is good or bad or sufficient or not sufficient in either way, because I don't think there's evidence to prove either side of this sufficiently. But we're definitely not the States. There's no question.
Okay.
There's no question.
And so your third article was about that there's no simple solution, and that you wanted to come up with some solutions. Are you going to suggest some?
Yeah, I mean, I could suggest a few. There's
okay. Well, we're going to take a break
yeah.
for some messages and come back in just a minute with your suggestions for what we should be doing. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting tonight with Alex Vezina. He is the CEO of Prepared Canada, emergency preparedness company. He teaches in the emergency disaster and emergency preparedness program at York University. And he's written 3 articles recently, 3 columns recently on gun control and published in the Toronto Sun. And, the first article was based on slogans are too simplistic and we shouldn't be taking them at first glance. We got to be thinking them through. And he argues that that's on both sides of the issue. The second was as a response to a bunch of the criticism that he got and comments that he got from the first one. And then his third one was on solutions, and that too many of the solutions people put forward are simplistic. And so, Alex, you criticized some of the simplistic solutions in your third article, and you came up with some solutions of your own. Tell me what your criticism of the simplistic solutions were, first of all, and then we'll turn to what your own solutions are. Yeah.
So the problem that a lot of the solutions have is, and I see when politicians make this mistake, it's one thing. I don't have too much of an issue with it because they are the types of professionals that they are. One thing that a lot of experts will do, I'm finding more and more now, is they'll make the claim that whatever their particular thing is the problem and that their thing needs to be solved. So you'll have a particular kind of expert that has gun control as their main point of issue, and they'll say that guns are the problem and nothing else is relevant. Or they'll make the argument that the safety of the schools, or schools being a soft target, are the problem. Nothing else is relevant. Mental health is the problem. Nothing else is relevant. Toxic masculinity is the problem. Nothing else is relevant. Video games are the problem. Nothing else is relevant. Whatever it is, right? Like they'll basically pigeonhole, and they'll say whatever their thing is the only issue that matters, or they'll say it in a way where that's not directly what they're saying, but that is definitely what they're inferring. And experts really aren't supposed to do that. They're not supposed to make a claim like that. And just a bit of an aside here to kind of prove the point as to why experts shouldn't be doing that and why they should know better. Many years ago, there was an earthquake in Italy, and a few seismologists went on the news and said that there wouldn't be an earthquake tomorrow. And then, of course, as bad luck would have it, there was an earthquake the next day. And some people died because they didn't evacuate. The seismologists were found to be partially liable and were sentenced to 10 to 15 years in jail, because as an expert, they did not say that there was an incredibly low probability, a near impossibility of an earthquake tomorrow. They said there was not going to be an earthquake tomorrow. Similarly, if you have a friend that's an engineer and you ask them how nice your back deck is, and they say it looks good, and then it falls, they can potentially be liable. It's important to consider when an expert that when you're saying something, your information, your title matters. There's weight to what you're saying. So by saying that any given problem is the only problem is an issue, and I basically outlined the issues there. So the main argument with the gun control one is there's next to no evidence to support that it's the only issue, and I detail it a bit more in there. And we've kind of already talked about that one, so we'll go over the other ones. The mental health angle has a range. It's kind of a spectrum issue. It ranges between the assumption that people who commit school shootings are innately evil, and there is an innate evil in the universe. This is on the standard good evil spectrum, right? That type of idea. So there ranges from an innate evil to assuming that the person is not culpable at all and that they're a product of their environment. And in either case, basically the person is being dehumanized to the point where an innate evil person could not know that they're doing a bad thing, or has no control over the fact they're doing a bad thing. They're just evil. Or a person who was abused as a child and was conditioned to do this is not capable of making a rational decision. In both cases, the rationality of the shooter is basically just being thrown away, and the culpability of them is basically just being thrown out, which I think is a bit of an issue because it's a bit extreme, and it's frankly not supported in the literature. And then there's all the arguments in the middle within mental health, but there's basically a wide spectrum of them, and they try to place the blame on mental health entirely, which I think is problematic because it's a complex issue with more than one aspect. On the safety of schools part, this one was actually pretty interesting. There's two major things that come up from that. There's the idea that schools essentially radicalize partially the shooter to want to seek them out as a target by being, from the viewpoint of the shooter, their point of greatest oppression. And we've seen this play out in quite a few of these shooters' manifestos. Which is an interesting argument because you're seeing some experts almost blame the school for the fact that they're being shot because school is so miserable. Why would this extreme variable not shoot it up? Which is an interesting perspective to take. I don't know if many people are really comfortable with that, and I don't see it being too broadly supported with the literature. But anytime that you have an extreme variable, you could kind of make that. And the other thing is, I don't see how you could really, like this comes from the idea that the person is marginalized by the school, and they find the school to be the point of oppression because they're marginalized there. So it's the school's fault for not preventing the marginalization. But then you'd have to make it so a child is never marginalized at school ever. So you'd have to eliminate all bullying. You'd have to have perfect teachers. You'd have to have perfect quality control of every aspect of the school experience. Like it's like infeasible. Like, I don't know how you could ever prevent any child from ever being marginalized ever. You know, like it's impossible. It's impossible. So
it's a nice, ideological, ideal world to believe that.
Yeah, but like you can't do it.
No, the reality is we have some bad teachers and we have some bad schools, and what we got to do is teach people to deal with problems and challenges in life, and not.
Yeah, and then there's the second part of it, which was more interesting, and I think that there's potentially a really strong argument here. There's the argument that any government institution that is responsible for handling things that are critical to the public interest, so critical infrastructure, or vulnerable persons, which I would argue that children and the school systems acting as the effective guardians during the duration of school would be vulnerable persons. I think there's little disagreement there, right? Any public institution that fits that category has an obligation to the public to not be a soft target. That is an interesting angle. And when you explore, so essentially the schools shouldn't be so easy to attack. Now,
so this argument that Ted Cruz is making, that we need
one
door
and
an armed person at the one door.
Well, there's different ones. So the thing is, there's different ways to make something not a softer or a harder target. And you hear the often American argument of the best way to defend yourself from a school shooter is to arm the teachers, which I don't personally agree with for a variety of reasons. But there's a bigger challenge here. You need to, if you're approaching this issue from this angle, you need to make the school less hard to attack while not making it a more miserable experience, making it more likely to be attacked. Like you have that interesting challenge there. And, for the lack of a better term, militarizing your school does not necessarily make it feel welcoming, which is a problem. But there are things like more advanced access control systems. Like the same way that many secure buildings for places of work have access control, there are a lot of theories now about the way you could integrate access control into a school, especially high schools, socializing kids into getting used to doing basic access control that they'll have to do for the workforce and using them in school systems. It's more expensive, but it's not putting armed guards at the door. There is an interesting theory that I saw pretty recently show up in some emergency management literature, and there's some internal conversations that have been happening where you dual function and integrate the police system and the school system directly, where you have satellite outposts of police embedded in the school to act as the community police hub. So the police aren't separate from them. You simply have a police presence in the school, because if someone wants to go see their local police force, the office is on the school grounds. So it improves response time. There's a police presence that acts as a deterrent. It's an interesting theory. There's some infrastructure cost problems, because that can get pretty expensive depending on how you retrofit. And there's a lot of challenges there, but I've seen a lot more coming up on that now, which is interesting. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but it's something that's out there. A lot of the ideas that are coming out are expensive or intangible or both, or not easy. Because if this was a solution that was easy to fix, we would have already probably done it.
But haven't we found the solution? The solution is proven out, isn't it, by your statistics on Canada versus the United States? And we've seen in the press a lot of statistics on Australia that did not have gun control and had some mass shootings and instituted gun control, and there have been mass shootings since then. So isn't the answer that gun control of some measure works?
Yes, but and I actually got I ran a lot of the statistics myself actually over the last few days, because I was looking at this problem and I noticed that a lot of the statistics that have been run have actually been fudged on both sides. And from what I'm actually in the process of getting this confirmed by some statisticians, because I almost don't believe my own numbers here. There appears to be very little correlation to no correlation between registered firearms and homicides, period, anywhere. Registered firearms specifically. There also appears to be next to no correlation between unregistered firearms and homicides either, which is very odd, because I expected that one to show up. But there's and in one statistic, there was actually an inverse correlation, a weak one, that when the number of registered firearms went up, homicides went down. So the numbers are not consistent. I've seen multiple studies on this. For example, one's from Harvard, where they ran that study and they concluded, and I'll send you this later, but they ran a study and they concluded that when guns go up, homicides go up, but their variable for guns going up was the number of gun homicides. So they checked homicides against homicides and said, because homicides went up, thus we have a correlation. which
Doesn't make any sense because
like it doesn't. Like, so I checked all of these and I found no.
Okay, is that between states or between countries or what?
They ran both, and they fudged the numbers in both cases.
Okay,
I ran across 50
but
studies,
if you
and they
take
were
a
all
look
fudged.
at, I don't know about your current statistics, but you had the numbers for Canada. I think the numbers for Australia have been well publicized. As you have more lax gun control, you've got a lot more homicides.
No, but
Now,
here's the problem.
In
the
Canada,
studies will
we
say
don't
one thing.
have registration of guns anymore. We did have registration of long guns, but we
Sure.
don't have registration of guns. We have that you've got to have a registration of a person that is a gun user, and they've got to take some training. And so that's one issue, and that seems to work. Is that not the case?
So far, I think, but actually, based on what the statistics were saying, maybe not really. The statistics that I've been saying, and this is why this has been so baffling. It should be the case. It stands to reason that logically it would be the case, but statistically it appears maybe. Canada has a very unique problem where we are really not in control of our own gun problem.
Because of the border.
Because of the border, fundamentally. And Australia, actually, there's conflicting data that states that there's data on actually both sides in there. And honestly, the numbers are getting fudged by everybody. Like, if you want to actually find out what's happening in this thing, you have to go look at the statistics yourself. You have to look at what the exact claim was and make sure the exact statistical claim matches up to what they're saying, which in most cases
okay. But
it doesn't. I'm just telling you, it doesn't. It doesn't match.
You're the expert. We got to try to figure out what the solution is.
Okay, yeah.
And what we want to do. So we're going to take a break and we're going to come back and you're going to have a couple of minutes to tell us what you think the solution is.
Yeah.
Stay with us, everybody. Interesting conversation. 2 minutes. We'll be back. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting today about gun control. And Alex Vezina, who is the CEO of Prepared Canada, is our guest. He also teaches at York University. And what's the program called?
Disaster and Emergency Management.
Disaster and Emergency Management. And he's written recently 3 columns in the Toronto Sun about gun control and the gun issue. And it's been interesting talking to him. And his first article was don't accept the simplistic slogans on either side of the gun control issue. And that was kind of interesting because he argued that, guns don't kill people, people kill people is simplistic in the extreme, because in reality, guns do make it easier to kill people and kill them more efficiently and faster with less personal contact and maybe from a farther distance, et cetera, et cetera. But then also, he attacked the opposite side of things that says, we should do anything and everything if we save one life, which we clearly don't do in swimming pools and cars and sports and lots of things in life. We accept a certain amount of risk because we believe in freedom and we believe in going out and having a good time and doing things that are at times risky. And then his second column was interesting because he got a whole bunch of response to the first column and he tried to address some of those issues. And then his third column took a look at some of the simplistic solutions, not the slogans, but the solutions, and also found out that some of those simplistic solutions don't work. And he got very frustrated with some of the numbers that tried to prove that those solutions didn't work. So Alex, you're the expert. You spent a bunch of time thinking about this topic. You've written 3 articles. You've talked to me for the last 45 minutes. What's the solution?
Well, that actually depends on the problem, Brian. So the solution depends on the problem fundamentally, and it depends on what you're trying to solve. So I'd like to challenge you, and we can do this rapid fire. What is the problem that you would like to solve?
The problem is most recently military, weapons being used in the United States for mass shootings in schools. So we haven't seemed to have those assault weapons be used in Canada in a while, but they have been used previously in Canada. So, I think that the federal government hasn't really addressed handguns in the last short while. It's been assault weapons.
Okay, so is the problem then how do we as Canadians reduce assault weapons being produced and utilized in America?
No.
Because you know what I'm going to say to that.
That is the U.S. problem. The Canadian problem is how we make sure that people don't access them and use them in Canada.
Okay, so if we're assuming they're coming in from the States and that we have that open border, how do you solve an unsolvable problem is essentially the question. So we can't solve that problem. We can try to reduce it, but essentially you're you're trying to stop the ocean coming in with a bucket. So how many more buckets would you like at the shoreline? Through funding police and border services.
So you're saying that that because the Americans manufacture and sell fairly freely assault weapons, there's almost nothing we can do in Canada to stop
we can
them.
reduce it, and police can work hard as they have been to reduce it, but it cannot be, you cannot eliminate the risk. Like
Okay, so then
people should dispel the illusion that we can eliminate this risk entirely.
So then problem number 2 would just be homicides with non-assault weapons, handguns.
Okay, well, I mean, how do you reduce homicides? How do you make people not want to kill each other?
So you're saying the guns are stopping the flow of guns into Canada is illegal guns into Canada is not possible, is what you're saying.
Stopping is impossible. Reducing is a question of how much money you're willing to spend for how much effect.
And all of the registration and bans and things like this are ineffectual because they're just impacting legal owners, not illegal owners. And it's the illegal owners that we have to be worried about.
In Canada's example, yes. In America's example, you may find that registration is significantly effective, especially because in many cases, people are legally obtaining weapons, right? So different examples here, but in Canada's example, yes. And this has come out with the police statistics, and this is basically agreed on by virtually everybody in the space, that Canada's problem is America's legal guns, fundamentally. But as far as homicides are concerned, then the question is, why do people kill each other? And, you know, who is most likely to be the person that kills you, right? In hypothetical, not you personally, but like hypothetically, right? Like what are the most common people that do it? People that you know, where crimes of passion, etc. Statistically, you look at who police look at first when they have suspects. What is the biggest tensions in a family? Because we're dealing with stressors that cause people to basically lose their cool. Money. Okay, so let's discuss solving the homicide issue by bringing in universal basic income and see how expensive that is. Like we're talking about eliminating money as a problem in the family unit. Like we're talking about huge fundamental root issues that are part of everything that hits society. So like if you want to solve some of these things, which are issues that arise.
You're saying Ted Cruz is right, that what we need is one door and police at the door, that entries to schools have to be more restricted. And
yeah, but then they'll shoot up somewhere else.
You're saying we can't stop guns, and we can't, unless we give everyone an income, we can't solve all our mental health problems.
Well, yeah, and then here's the thing. So let's say you give everybody an income. Does it still mean that they have access to mental health? Can you afford it? Society is run by having all of the infrastructure is basically being pushed to the max, because if you have extra money, you bolster an infrastructure.
Okay, so when we go to an airport, when we go to a concert, when we go to a hockey game, we have to go through a metal detector. Should everyone entering a school have to go through a medical detector?
Well, how expensive is it to get those metal detectors, and how much money are we going to have to take from all of the other relevant files to pay for them? And then are we willing to do it? Like, here's an example, just to put this point here. If you want to pay for the metal detectors, where is it going to come from? Are you going to take it from autism services? You can take it from veterans pay? Are you going to take it from social services for children who are wards of the state because their families are dead? Like, where are you getting the money from? Because you're going to get the money from somewhere. You have to. It doesn't just magically appear. And then is the harm or lack of help that occurs from that money being reallocated worth more than the protection you gain from having the metal detectors?
So this is a really depressing conversation, Alex, because
you're talking to me.
What you're effectively saying is that there's no reasonable solution to the
if there was, we would have done it. We're not the Americans.
And our problem, bottom line, you're saying, is legal gun purchases in the United States.
Here's the thing. Okay, here's a problem that we can solve, and I think this is what we're actually doing. And I think we should be more honest about this. There is something to be said for the value of public perception of safety, and regardless of whether or not banning guns actually makes people safer, which most of the data would suggest it probably doesn't, but because of the American problem for the Canadian example, it will make people feel safer, and there is value in feeling safer. And it could be argued that the value of the number of the public that would feel safer with a handgun ban would outweigh the displeasure felt from the people having their property forcibly bought back or whatever. So you could make that utilitarian argument, but that's the argument you're making because you can't prove the public safety yet. Well, not based on the numbers I've seen anyways.
Alex Vezina, CEO of Prepared Canada. Thanks for joining us tonight and talking a little bit about guns and the problem about gun control, and that there's no easy solution, and that the problem really is the fact that it's so easy to buy guns, whether they be assault weapons or handguns in the United States, and that with our porous open border between Canada and the United States, it's difficult, if not almost impossible, to stop the flow of illegal guns legally bought in the United States, but illegally brought into Canada. And that, as I've said on numerous occasions in the past, it's not legal guns in Canada that are the problem. It is the illegal guns in Canada that are the problem. And it's pretty difficult to regulate something that has already been brought in illegally. And I don't think that the people that own illegal guns are going to voluntarily register them. Anyway, it's a problem, no question. Alex, thanks for joining us. That's our show for tonight. I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. Thanks for joining us. Good night, everybody.